Let's get started. Hello, my friends, and welcome to NFRW Empower Hour. I am Glennis Chester, your host. This is a series that provides in-depth discussions on issues that are forefront in today's culture. We want to give you the tools to speak with authority on important topics that we're discussing in today's political landscape. I'm very, very excited about today's program. With the steady decline of our country pretty much at every turn and the 2024 elections right around the corner, every single one of us is in campaign mode. But without a well-defined strategy, you're likely spinning your wheels and wasting valuable resources. And none of us like that. So our speakers this evening are going to present a strategy that you can implement in your own state to make measurable gains for Republicans. The Voter Engagement Project, VEP, was used with excellent results here in Texas over the last two election cycles. And it utilizes partnerships with organizations like ours for its volunteer base. Every one of us has an opportunity to play a pivotal role in taking our country back. And I hope that you will listen intently, take notes, rewatch it later, because the information is amazing. And if I know my speakers the way I think I do, they're going to talk really fast and you're going to have a lot of information to absorb. But before I introduce them, I want to do just a little bit of light housekeeping. Please remember to keep yourselves muted. If you have questions, please type them into the chat and we'll get to as many of them as we can at the end of the program. A huge thank you to Erica Watley, who's providing technical support for tonight's program. Could not do it without you. Appreciate you. And finally, don't forget to let your clubs know that we have past episodes of this program available on the NFRW website in the resource library. And they are always there. So whenever it's convenient, they can go back and utilize our recordings. So tonight, I am so honored to introduce my guest. I have no doubt that you all know Karl Rove. I mean, the name alone, he's just a little famous. He has been engaged in politics since his teenage years and most commonly known for working as a senior advisor and deputy chief of staff to President George W. Bush. Rocky Gage is our other guest this evening, and he served as the chief of staff to Representative Steve Allison. He's been engaged in multiple parts of the party as well and was even awarded the Rising Star in Texas politics, which is kind of a big thing here. Most recently, he worked as the executive director on the VEP in Texas, and I was so thrilled to be able to work with these gentlemen over the past few years. It was an absolute pleasure, and I was so grateful for all the lessons that I learned in working with them. And I don't know, I feel like in a way I'm sitting at the feet of masters and just trying to take in as much information as I can. So for this evening, we get to share some of their knowledge with the rest of you, and hopefully we can really utilize it to turn the tide in this country because we are at a tipping point. So Karl and Rocky, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Please take it away.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Glennis. Thanks for having us. And more importantly, thanks for all that you and your colleagues in the TFRW did to make our 4 years or 3.5 years of voter registration activity in Texas so important and so successful. First, a little bit of history. I'm not a native Texan. When I moved here, I went to work in the Texas state legislature, the senior Republican in the legislature. Out of 150 members of the Texas House, we had 16. And in the state Senate, we had, out of 31 members of the state Senate, we had 3. And the last time we had elected a Republican governor was 1868. And we went basically for 100 and, let's see, what would that be? 116 years without a Republican governor or another statewide elected official in the state capitol. And yet we've become we were a battleground state in 1980, one of the 10 battlegrounds of 1980, because we've been so Democrat. And now we're a Republican state, but we forget how long it took us to get there and how we got there. George W. Bush is the second Republican in 126 years to be governor and the first Republican in the history of the state to be reelected to a second consecutive term. We're only on our fourth Republican governor in the history of the state of Texas since Reconstruction. And we got here by grassroots activity, by the mighty, Texas Federation of Republican Women leading the way. Our first Republican governor since Reconstruction. His wife was a leader in the TFRW and the Republican National Committee woman. And she was pretty smart, practical Paul. And she convinced her husband, Bill Clements, to invest money in a grassroots get out the vote effort. And Bill Clements won in a surprise upset by about 11,000 votes out of over 3 million cast. And Rita Bass Clements was a big reason why. And we did this every 2 years thereafter for a long, long time, starting in 1978 through the 1980s and the 1990s. But sometime in the 2000s, we stopped doing it. And in 2018, it nearly cost us. We at one point were 100 out of the 150 members of the Texas House. And after the 2018 election, we were down to 84. We lost a couple of congressional seats. Ted Cruz nearly lost the Senate race to Robert Francis O'Rourke. And so after the election, some of us who'd been involved in helping build the party said, we got to get back to basics. And we got to start by getting people active in registering voters, with the idea being if that could happen in early 2019 and 2020, then we could build the group of volunteers who would be ready to do the get out the vote effort in the fall and reinvigorate the grassroots activity of getting out the vote, which we had been really good at for a number of years. The good news is in 2020, we'd have at the top of the state ticket Senator John Cornyn, who was elected to the Supreme Court and elected as Attorney General because of that grassroots activity. So he was a big proponent of this, as was our governor, Governor Greg Abbott. So Steve Ministeri, a former state Republican chairman, and I got together and said, let's go out and raise the money. Let's figure out how to go register voters, and let's go raise the money to get it done and do it. Now, we went out and raised $2 million, because what we learned was that as we went around the country talking to people involved in voter registration, the cost of registering a new voter is roughly $20. And we wanted to add 100,000 new Republicans to the rolls for the 2020 election. And we didn't know what the hell we were doing. We were metric driven. So we sat down at the beginning of it and said, okay, what are the various ways in which we're going to register voters? And how many of the 100,000 new voters that we're going to get, how many do we think will come from each activity? And number one activity was door to door. So the big chunk of the voters, of the new voters, were going to come from going door to door. The second big chunk were going to come from phones, from phoning people. Third biggest chunk was going to come from mail. The fourth largest chunk was going to come from a neighbor-to-neighbor program that Steve Ministeri thought up, called 10K for 10R. 10,000 Republicans who would each take on the responsibility of registering 10 new voters. And we would give them the list of the voters that they would get. We'd pick the 10 unregistered likely Republicans closest to their address and give them to go. And the last way that we thought we'd get them is by texting. We would get cell phone numbers for unregistered Republicans and text them a message and follow up with them. But that was going to be a small percentage of what we got. So we went out and developed two lists of targets. One list we knew to an absolute certainty were unregistered Republicans. We took the people who filed a change of address card with the post office and took a look at them at their previous address. If they moved here from California, we checked out were they a registered Republican in California, or say Illinois or New York. If they moved here from a state like Ohio, where you don't register like by party, as in Texas, you don't register by party, did they vote in the Republican primary? And if these people on the change of address list were Republicans and were not on the voter file, then we knew to an absolute certain they were unregistered Republicans. Then we took data, big data, a bunch of commercial data services, and identified people who are not on the registration rolls, and then took a bunch of data about them. What kind of purchases did they make? What kind of car did they drive? What was the value of their home? What was the size of your utility bill? Were they married? Did they have children? What magazines did they read? What kind of purchases did they make? Lots of things that helped us identify, paint a picture of who they were. And then we had data scientists take that and rank people on a scale of 1 to 10 Republican, and 1 to 9 Republican and 1 to 9 Democrat. And we took the number 9 Republicans, the likely unregistered Republicans, among that micro-targeted data list, and put them into our target universe. Now, we set up 2 voter registration efforts. One registration effort was the traditional one where you go hire a bunch of people to go knock on doors and say, you're not registered to vote, can we give you a registration card? This was run by a super PAC, and the governor, the lieutenant governor, the speaker helped raise $13.5 million, most of it in a half an hour long meeting with about 10 people in the room. And they underwrote that traditional, let's go hire a bunch of people and have them go knock on doors. And they began in March of 2019. Now, we wanted to have an effort that got volunteers involved. So we were going to take the new mover Republicans and the 9s and maybe even the 8s on the micro-targeted list and have them work by volunteers. And we began in the early fall of 2019. By the end of the year, we had stumbled on two things, two important facts. One is the traditional method was not working. By the end of the year, the other group, the super PAC, had spent millions of dollars and had, by mid-February, 58,000 people that they'd registered on the voter rolls, and about 18,000 people who they thought they'd registered but couldn't match against the voter file. And on the other hand, we were having enormous success with texting, all the other stuff, the door knocking and the phones and the mail, all of it was, sort of like working, but not working near as well as texting. We could text people. We got their cell phone numbers. We texted them a message saying, you're not registered to vote. Can we send you a voter registration form? 1, yes, 2, no, stop, take off the list. And we were getting great results. Now, we made so many mistakes, I can't believe it. I mean, we started out we got what were called unconforming replies. People would send us something other than 1, 2, or stop. And we sort of let them build up until finally we had enough volunteers they could go look at them. And what was amazing was it was gold. Can you send me 2 forms, not 1? My daughter's off at Texas Tech. Can you help? Okay, how can we get her registered to vote? I need 3 forms. I want to help. And so suddenly we realized that we needed to read the communications that we got. Anyway, we kept doing it. And the TFRW became an enormous source of strength for us because we had to have people follow up on the people who said, send me the form. We would send them the form automatically, and then volunteers would monitor that to see if they registered to vote. And if they hadn't registered by the time we updated the file in a month or so, we'd have TFRW volunteers start to call them. We had other phone calls, and Rocky, who ran the program in the last cycle, is going to talk about some of those. But we could not have done this without TFRW and lots of volunteers, because while the technology was there, we needed to have volunteers to be able to make the follow-up calls. Now, we armed them with technology, and Rocky will talk about it, that can operate off your phone. So it wasn't like we were back in the old days with 3 carbon paper and handwritten lists and so forth. But it was amazing. At the end of the year, we did not register 100,000 people. We registered 213,000. And the $13 million effort that was going to register 450,000 new voters spent $7.2 million and got 100,000 registrations. And they only got 100,000 registrations because they had 83,000 people they could identify, and they had 18,000 people on a list that they couldn't match against the voter file. And we turned that over to TFRW volunteers who looked at them and said, well, you know what? I don't think this record says that the first name is Johnson and the last name is Karen. I think that's wrong. And this has a street name, but no street address. And this doesn't have the right city. The city is misspelled. And this doesn't have a zip code that's even in Texas. And volunteers, again, cleaned up the list. And when they got finished cleaning up, just getting on their computer and entering a name and a street name, and they get a street number and they get the right zip code and everything, the list that was the traditional method ended up with 100,000 registrations. They picked up 17 out of the 18,000 that they couldn't match against the voter file. They cleaned them up and got them matched. Now, what happened in the election? John Cornyn treated that group as one of the priority groups for get out the vote. And in the election, Beth Van Dyne in a congressional district in North Texas won by 4,500 votes. And there were 7,000 newly registered Republicans in her district who turned out to vote. You know what it cost us to get those 7,000 newly registered Republicans? It didn't cost us $20. texting allowed us to get them for $7 a registration. So we spent $49,000, got 7,000 new people to register and turn out to vote, and she wins. And guess what? That's the best $49,000 we spent, because between her campaign and the NRCC and a super PAC, they spent nearly $6 million. And the Democrat, between the Democrat campaign, the DCCC, and a super PAC, spent $6 million. And the whole 10 or 11, $12 million race is settled by spending $49,000 to get 7,000 new registrants on the rolls and out to vote. We have two members of the Texas House whose winning margin is less than the number of newly registered Republicans in their district. And we have 14 other Republicans in which their winning margin, between 15% and 85% of their winning margin, was newly registered Republicans. So, here we have an election which the Democrats thought, oh, after 2018, we have a chance to knock off Cornyn. He wins by 10 points. A third of his total, 20% of his victory margin comes from newly registered Republicans. A third of President Trump's winning margin in the state comes from newly registered Republicans. So we did the effort again in 2022. Now we'd scraped the cream off of the top with what we'd done in 2020, but we had more people to go, and we also had experience that we had at great pain. Had learned in 2019 and 2020. So we began it again. And sure enough, we were able, despite the fact that we had taken the cream off the top, we were still able to register people for just over $7. And our fundraising allowed us to literally say, okay, we're going to take target congressional districts and target legislative districts and use more expensive means of registration. We're going to do all the texting we can do, but we're going to have extra mail and extra phone calls and even try to do some paid door knocking to make certain that in target districts we maximize the total. And we got 187,000 new Republican registrations in 2022. So think about it. In the last two cycles, the voter registration rolls in Texas have grown by roughly 1.7 million new voters. And of those, 500,000 are directly attributable to the Republican voter registration efforts. And surely some of that 1.2 million are Republicans as well. So it's clear that we've won the registration battle in Texas. In fact, the Democrats admitted it after the 2020 election. They wrote an autopsy and they said, we don't know how, we don't know why, it surely mystifies us, but the Republicans outdid us on registration to the tune of 88,000 more Republicans than Democrats in the last 2 months of the registration period alone. Now, we didn't go out there and beat our chest, but, and make it a big deal. We ran under the radar, but we decided we were going to do something about turning around Texas and putting it back in the Republican column stronger than it was. And that's exactly what happened. And, we didn't have as many races in 2022 in which we made the critical difference, but there are a larger number of races in which we expanded the margins. And as you know, if you take somebody who's winning by 2 or 3 points and suddenly they're winning by 5 or 6 or 7, it discourages the opposition. And if you got somebody who's winning by 5 or 6 or 7 and suddenly they're winning by 10, that really does something to discourage opposition. That's exactly what happened this last time. And we think it's going to happen again in 2024. The Democrats, particularly in the Texas legislature, have learned that they can't make progress. We went from 84 to 85, and they'd been hoping to take us from 84 down to less than 76, 78, the number needed to be in the majority in the House. Anyway, that's the overview of it. The guy who actually did it all is Rocky Gage. Rocky is an enormous talent. And with he and his cousin, Eli was the budget and numbers guy, and the strategist and big brain was Rocky. And, everybody, we went into it thinking, well, we'll be lucky to get close to our performance of last time around, per registration. And Rocky, by paying attention to it each and every day and testing everything and measuring it, put us in a place where we not only matched what we did, but did better in our texting. So anyway, my colleague Rocky Gage, he'll tell you exactly how important the TFRW was in all of this and what they did and how you too could play a similar role in your states.
Well, thank you, Karl. As you mentioned, and TFRW was by far our most crucial and productive volunteer base They played a vital role in our success. What they were able to accomplish was nothing short of remarkable in its own right. So I do want to start by thanking TFRW President Kit Whitehill and the members of her leadership team. They were amazing to work with. In total, they completed just under 1 million volunteer phone calls. That's huge. So what we do is we begin our interaction with every unregistered voter, as Karl said, by texting them. We send them a clever message, but we let them know that they're unregistered, and we ask if we can send them a registration form. And if they say yes, we consider them a commitment. So a commitment is that somebody who has committed to register, they said, yes, send me a registration form. I'll fill it out and I'll mail it back. Once they've committed, we send this form and we're able to track it similar to the way you would track a package from Amazon. So we know exactly when the registration form hits their mailbox. This is when the volunteer becomes extremely important. Once that mailer hits the mailbox, we take a list of everyone who committed, who received a registration form, and we put it into an application called Red Dialer, and we send it to the volunteer base, and they're able to just easily get on either a cell phone or a laptop or an iPad and click on the commitment's name. It will dial the commitment's phone number for them, and they can read a short script just telling the commitment that, hey, don't forget, we contacted you, you committed to register, you asked for a voter registration form, and that form is now in your mailbox. We'd appreciate it if you would fill it out and send it back. We came up with this idea because I got to thinking, how do I handle mail? If I were mailed a registration form and I'm busy, I'm running Karl's VEP project and I've got 3 kids and a number of other things going on. Would I remember that I requested this form? Would I get it and would I fill it out? And the answer was probably not. If you're anything like me, I get my mail, I scan through my mail for bills and any checks or anything important that may be coming in. And if it's made out of cardboard and it looks like a postcard or a political mailer or a 50% off coupon to get an oil change, I throw it away and I don't read it. So what we did is, as soon as it hits the mailbox, we have the TFRW volunteers call these individuals and say, hey, don't forget, you committed to registering and the form is in your mailbox and this is what it looks like. We also follow that up with a chaser text message that texts them to let them know that they received a form with a picture of the form. Once we begin using the volunteer base for these reminder phone calls, our scan back rate, which is the rate of return of these forms, increased by almost 8%. And they dropped our cost by about $7 per registration. And that's a massive savings when you consider we registered 170,000 new voters. We also use the volunteers just to make typical phone calls. So just the way that we would reach out to the volunteer via text message. Some of these people don't respond to the text messages. So we give them a phone call with the same message. Hey, you're not registered. This is the deadline. We'd appreciate if you'd get registered. Can we help you out by sending you a registration form? And again, this is very user-friendly for the volunteer. They just click on the name, it dials the number for them. They read the script, they fill out a quick survey, and we collect all the data and we make sure that the individual gets the form. We know that if our volunteers are to be successful, the process has to be as painless as possible. So we put someone on staff that's available almost 24/7. I mean, this guy would answer emails and phone calls up until midnight in most cases. But we put him on staff to manage and monitor the volunteers and answer almost in real time any questions that they may have. In addition to that, we hold several Zoom trainings a week, and the volunteers are able to answer questions, have discussions on these trainings, but more importantly, they're able to take these trainings as often as possible so that they become familiar with the process. Karl touched on it briefly, but another way that these volunteers have been used is to skim through our matches. So Karl alluded to it earlier. Sometimes our matching process isn't 100% accurate. Well, I don't want to say it's not 100% accurate. We have issues. We have kinks, as he mentioned. It might say Johnson Karen on Monroe Street, and she might live on Monroe Lane. And so our matching process wouldn't pick that up. But we would take those people who are close and we would email them a Excel spreadsheet, and we would have them eyeball test, and they would get with us and say, well, we think it was Karen Johnson on Monroe Lane, not Johnson Karen on Monroe Street. And we were able to pick up about 200 additional registrations by combing through that data with TFRW volunteers and a couple of interns. So we know that if we're going to be successful doing this moving forward into key states in 2024, we're going to need to expand upon our volunteer base and expand upon our volunteer efforts. So that's why we're excited to talk to you and hopefully work with you moving forward in 2024.
Thank you so much, Rocky. I know, having been involved with this effort over the last 2 election cycles, it really is very exciting. And at first you go, well, it's just registering people. How many people can there be? How can it make that much of a difference? But when you actually see the reports and you see the measurables and you're able to track, oh, we have this many commitments versus, this is what's been turned in by the Secretary of State. So we know now this many people have actually registered. It makes a huge difference. And then when you get the election results in and you're able to compare and say, oh my gosh, this many people voted for the first time. And I can't remember, one of you will have to remind me what the percentage is of newly registered voters as opposed to people that have been registered for a while and actually going to the polls. It's much higher for newly registered voters. But to see how much of a difference it makes, it's very, very exciting. And also we transitioned because, you have to register by a certain date. So we did all voter registration, and then we took that same pool of volunteers and transitioned them to get out the vote efforts. And again, use the same types of methodology to pinpoint areas where they really needed to get people out for specific elections that were more at risk, or places where we really needed to get a leg up. If they're a very blue district and we really needed to get more of our Republicans out there, then we would push our GOTV in those areas. And it was very exciting to be part of all of that. So I thank you all very much. Okay.
Glennis, can I make a couple more observations?
Yes, please.
So one thing we did was we fed these lists of newly registered Republicans to the candidates. So they got them each month electronically and at little or no cost. I mean, literally little or no cost. I mean, we had to do a minimal amount to federal candidates, but I mean, some of the candidates, one guy started calling them. He would just, he'd get in his car and be driven from event to event, and he just called a newly registered Republican and say, I saw where you registered to vote. I'm your state representative. Thanks for joining. Others would have volunteers call or send a piece of mail or a letter. And it was also very helpful that the governor in 2022 and the senator in 2020 made it a priority because they made use of the cell phone numbers by texting them. They sent them digital messages. They sent them mail. They had volunteers call on them. It was, this was all, and you're absolutely right. They voted at a higher percentage in both 2020 and 2022 than everybody else who was on the voter rolls. Another thing was, this turned out to be fun, I think, for a lot of people. And we let people know the success of it. Every month we put out a memo. We had numbers, we had numerics for every kind of activity. And so we showed the progress of the overall effort towards each of those metrics, starting obviously with how were we doing on getting commitments to register, and how were we doing in changing those commitments then into people who actually did register, but everything else like the number of phone calls and so forth. And we circulated it to donors and leadership, but we also included, for example, each month a list of the volunteers who were meeting sort of targets of numbers of calls completed, so they got some recognition. And we had a big conference both in 2021 after the presidential election, and then again this year after last year's midterms, where we had all the donors. This year we had 450 donors and a bunch of the TFRW volunteers. In fact, we brought the so-called super volunteers. If you completed more than 5,000 phone calls, you got invited to the conference and a hotel room and and feted. I mean, the conference opened with all of our super volunteers, including, I want to meet these sisters, the Pinchback sisters of Midland and Andrews, because these gals finished tens of thousands of phone calls each. I don't know what else they're doing in their life. We had two guys who said, you know what, our wives are involved in this. We got time. Can we make phone calls too? And we had two male super volunteers recruited by TFRW members from their husbands. And but anyway, the conference this year started off with Senator Cornyn recognizing in front of the entire crowd the accomplishment of the TFRW super volunteers, and people were amazed and energized by this symbol. And I think we also stumbled with Ministeri's help into a way to help the TFRW recruit new members by taking the Republican primary voter list, finding women who are between 35 and 55 who voted in at least two of the last four primaries, and then geocoding them by each one of the 100 and some odd chapters of the TFRW so that we could give them a list of people with cell phone numbers or landline numbers that they could call and say, why don't you come and join us at our next meeting? And so this effort, I think, not only gave the volunteers something positive to do and reinforced it, they all had, I think, a pretty good experience in it, but it also helped the TFRW grow.
Absolutely. And I know that's something that every one of our states would like to replicate, because growth is something that we need. We have to be vital and keep building up our bench and bring all those new people in. You can't have a group that people aren't engaged in. So it's important that we're always bringing in as many new women as possible. And I would say that, we're not meeting our potential for growth. We're really not. And a lot of it is that we're all so busy and we're all doing so many other things that we don't get as involved as we used to in clubs and groups and things like that. But politics has become something where everyone is involved. I mean, so we're at the point where you don't want everybody involved with politics, for heaven's sakes. Some of you go back to your other jobs, stop getting involved with politics. But it is part of our everyday lives now. And although, people may not want to be a part of a regular club meeting, that doesn't mean they don't need to be involved with our organization. So this is a great opportunity for us to get to reach out to those women who already believe the way we do and get them involved and give them the opportunity to join us. And we have had great results with that. So thank you again for thinking of us that way. And it's a great relationship. It helps build up the labor force for elections, which is what we do. And it helps get us more members so that we have more volunteers for the next election, which is what we do. So it's just a great win for everyone. I do want to see if we have any questions. I know I saw a few pop up. I know there was one specifically about the door-to-door campaigning. And it was interesting because this whole thing started in 2019 before we knew we were going to have COVID. So I'm curious what your thoughts are, either Rocky or Karl, either one can answer this. We know that our projected strategies were completely upside down. Texting worked more, door knocking didn't work. But how much of that was because of COVID and people weren't answering their doors, people weren't going out? And how much was just because, we've just changed as a society and we're not home as much and we don't answer our doors as much and everybody is, using their phones all the time. So what are your thoughts on that?
Let me go first and then Rocky. First of all, door knocking doesn't work for voter registration just simply because the idea of, knocking on a door and finding, the people that you're trying to get registered to vote live, there are fewer of them in any given area than your target voter universe. So knocking on doors to get people to register just requires a lot of people to walk a lot of steps in order to get a relatively modest number of people. In 2020, the Cornyn campaign, and I think in 2022, the Abbott campaign found that door-to-door contact was absolutely vital. And even in 2020, we would send out teams, T-shirts that identified them as Cornyn supporters or Republicans, masked up. They'd knock on the door, step back. People could answer the door, see that they were stepped back, and they could have the dialogue. So door to door is absolutely critical for voter persuasion and for get out the vote. It's just that the economics of it are really problematic for GOTV, or excuse me, for voter registration. And that was the whole thing behind the super PAC effort. I mean, it was all, they either did door knocking, or they stood outside, the DMV and asked people a questionnaire as they came in. And even then, we still have people who are conservative, call themselves conservative Democrats in this state. And what we found was that a significant number of people who answered the questionnaire that was conservative ended up being Democrats. And so, it just, better to operate off of good data than just to rely upon chance encounters outside the DMV, or even at gun shows or county fairs in conservative areas, or outside of, Christian, evangelical Christian churches. I mean, it was all, it was better to get the data to identify somebody who was a likely Republican than try and ferret it out by asking them questions as they came and went in their business.
Agreed.
I'll just add to that real quick. I think Karl hit on it. One of the biggest problems we see with knocking doors in terms of voter registration is just the density. If you walk a block to knock doors and ask them to vote for Governor Abbott, you're likely to find 5 or 7 homes on one block who have voted Republican that you can contact. You might find one that's unregistered in 3 blocks. So you're doing a lot more walking with a lot less contact. And if you're going to do a paid effort, that's very expensive. If you're going to do a volunteer effort, it's very frustrating. And one thing that we found is that we really couldn't get volunteers out to knock doors in the Texas heat. It's very, very hot here in June. And if they were going to go out and they were going to spend a weekend knocking doors, they were probably going to do it for Governor Abbott or perhaps one of their state representatives. But it was just frustrating and very, very inefficient and pricey to do it for voter registration.
Yes, I agree. Okay, so let's talk about how we could roll this out to other states. I mean, do you have a list of states that you think are going to be extremely important in 2024? Are there opportunities for other states that may not be on that list in 2024? What are your thoughts going forward?
Well, look, we want to encourage everybody to try and do this. Rocky and some of the others who've been involved in this effort are developing a proposal for the RNC. I've been talking to Chairman Ronna McDaniel about it, and she seems interested in some tests. Pick a couple of key states that have registration, like Texas, where you have to fill out a form and send it in, and then also pick some states where you can do online registration. But pick critical battleground states. We know that there are going to be critical Senate races in Montana and Ohio and West Virginia and Pennsylvania. There are going to be some governor's races, and there are going to be a lot of congressional races. And then the overlay the presidential race, we're going to have, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and probably, a few other states that could be up for grabs depending on who each party puts up. And so we want to encourage people, any Federation of Republican Women that are interested in this, Rocky and his people are happy to sit down with you and your state party leadership and say, here's how you can go about doing it. And, frankly, Rocky and his crew can either come in and advise you or even help manage the program for your state. I'm a volunteer, but Rocky's got to make a living because he's got 3 kids, and all I got is my dog, Doc Holliday, sitting over here, and a 2-year-old granddaughter. And we want to encourage people where this thing will work wherever there are people like Glynis and Kit and the rest of the crew that we've been working with in the TFRW. And it's measurable progress. You can measure this. You shouldn't go into this just sort of, on a wing and a prayer. You got to set goals and standards. And the great thing about this whole process is you can measure it. And if it ain't matching up to what your expectations are, then you can stop it, like we did with the paid effort. The paid effort was costing us $72 a registration. At the same time, they were spending $7 a registration for the VEP and less for the VEP texting registrations. We were spending, there were people that we didn't have a cell phone number for, so we had to either call them on a landline or we'd have to mail them a piece of mail or both, and both of those were more expensive. than the texting process.
Right. Okay. So let's look at some questions. Erica, have you had a chance to scroll through some of the questions that have come in? They were coming through pretty fast.
One that says, how can you purchase the data or hire a firm to provide these lists for you and set up the texting software?
Karl, you want me to take that one?
Yeah, why don't you take that one?
Sure. So we do purchase the data. We purchase the data from a company called Data Trust, and they give us the list of suspected unregistered Republican voters, as Karl mentioned earlier, broken down by confidence level, a 9, an 8, or a 7, 9 being those that we're most confident in, based off of the consumer data that Karl mentioned earlier. We buy that data and then we send it over to a texting vendor, and they append phone numbers. And then, of course, we come up with a message and we tell the texter what we'd like to send. I hope that answers the question.
Data Trust, incidentally, is the official sort of repository of Republican National Committee data. So all the presidential campaign and most of the Senate and House campaigns put their data there. And it's a good source of information. It's getting better all the time. And the price is pretty darn good. You know, we've had to work with them in order to improve the quality of the data they produce. But it's a good source for both sources of data, the new movers and the micro-targeted Republicans.
Okay, Erica, what else do we have?
One, what were differences between 2020 and 2022?
The differences regarding
I guess the response in the text messages.
Oh.
Well, we had in 2020, we had a text message from President Trump, which incidentally generated about 8,000 unconforming replies, a few of which were unrepeatable in this conversation, but most of which were some variation of, is this really Donald Trump? So we had volunteers call them and say, we're just following up your text message. Yes, that was President Trump. And it generated lots of hilarious, Martha, they're on the phone. They're telling me that was President Trump. You better not have erased that up on my phone. I told you that was the president. So anyway, it was a lot of fun. But the main thing is that we had higher rates of response among, I think it's fair to say, micro-targeted Republicans in 2020 than we did in 2022 and the new movers. But Rocky found ways through testing and some other tricks to keep the response rate, in acceptable levels.
Okay, I do see one question here. Last cycle I received.
Rocky, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, yeah, I would just say that in 2020, you had the excitement of a presidential campaign kind of running over the top of everything. And we didn't have that in 2020. And as Karl mentioned earlier, you scraped the cream off the top in 2020. So we were getting those people who maybe had already been contacted and still didn't register. So we had to work a little hard to get them out. What we did do is we finally decided to test our messaging. We were kind of going with Democrats are bad, you need to vote Republican or else at the beginning. And I said, everybody's sending that message, right? It's kind of like when I ran campaigns, that everyone was sending a red, white, and blue mailer to your mailbox saying they were going to lower your taxes. How do we cut through the noise? So we decided we were just going to send a message basically saying, hey, we want to help you. Did you know that you're unregistered? Because you'd be surprised. A lot of people don't understand that they're unregistered. They might move from Williamson County to Travis County, and they don't understand that if you move from one county to another, you have to re-register. So we would get unconforming replies that would say, you're crazy. I've been registered for 20 years. And we would say, well, have you recently moved? Well, yeah, I just recently moved into Travis County. Well, you're unregistered. So we kind of changed our message from the sky is falling and you better get out and do this or else. And we started saying, hey, we just want to let you know that you're unregistered. We want to help make the process easy. And oh, by the way, the deadline is coming up. And once we included into the message that it's public information that you're not registered, your neighbors are registered, and oh, by the way, the deadline's coming up, our commitment rate increased significantly.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that Rocky discovered was the more official the mail pieces looked, in 2022, the better off we were. So it, we ditched the red, white, and blue. Joe Biden is Stop Joe Biden, Keep Texas Red, to a more muted Keep Texas Red, but looking semi-official.
Excellent. Okay, so I see there are several questions about registration, people getting solicitations to become registered for names that don't live at their home. And how can they find out who is registered to their address? That would just be going through the Secretary of State's website, correct?
Well, many states do have the file online, so yes. But look, you're going to have data problems. I call it the Harriet O'Neill problem. I'm not a lawyer, but I office at a small law firm in Austin. And one of my office mates is Harriet O'Neill, who used to be on the Texas Supreme Court. And she and her husband, Carrie Kamak, moved a couple years ago. So you have Carrie and Harriet at their old address and Carrie and Harriet at their new address. And then Harriet orders a lot of stuff on mail or online. They get sent to the office. So we have 3 different addresses for Harriet O'Neill. Now she's registered at her new address, but she's no longer shown as registered at her old address. And she sure as heck ain't registered at 919 Congress. So you always have this problem in the micro-targeted data of people who are registered at one address, have recently moved from another address, but have their items sent to their office that may not show up as an office or may not be known to be an office, may look like an apartment, for example. So you just have to deal with that. And, sometimes you suppress the addresses in the downtown zip code, but increasingly, like even in Austin, you've got large apartment complexes downtown where some of our voters live. And so you can't take 78701 and completely suppress it. So it's just a problem you have to live with and work with the data people to try and minimize.
We work very hard to clean it up and minimize it. And we also track that data. So there are a number of replies: wrong person, wrong address, I'm already registered, or deceased. The individual we're contacting is deceased. And we would track the replies that we got in each section. And throughout the project, all of them remained below 1%, which is pretty good when you consider that we sent millions of text messages.
Okay, so I'm trying to look through these. I see. Okay. Can you pinpoint national and regional volunteer efforts for registering voters in projected key swing states and use volunteers for the presidential and key Senate congressional races to win the White House and retain majorities? I live in Nebraska, so for example, volunteering to register voters to hold Representative Don Bacon's seat.
I'm not certain I understand the question, but yes, you can do this everywhere in the country. And if you are in a solid red state, you can certainly participate in blue states or purple states in helping register voters there. Because, it's like if you're in Nebraska, you can help in Wisconsin. All it takes is a cell phone and a commitment by the TFR or by the Nebraska Federated Republican Women's Club to make phone calls into Wisconsin and volunteer in that state. Absolutely. Same in that you've got a swing district there. You can have people from all across the state call into that district, or if there are other swing districts in other states and you've got, you don't have any in your state, absolutely. The NFRW will is a mechanism by which you can be talking to each other and saying, we're here to help.
Okay, so have you targeted high school or college students?
That's a really good question. Karl, do you want to take it?
You take that one. You take it.
Sure. When I first came on, I said we need to target high school kids, those who are coming of age, those who will be eligible to register and vote in this next election. But after some discussion, we realized it's pretty difficult. They don't, there's very little consumer data, right? And that's kind of how we model whether or not they're Republican. They don't have a history of voting. Sure, we could probably match them with their parents, and perhaps their parents have voted in Republican primaries, but that doesn't mean that the kid's going to vote in Republican primary. And, the younger generation tends to vote Democrat 2-1 nowadays. So there was the possibility that we would go out and get them registered and they would vote Democrat. So can it be done? Probably. We just haven't found a way to target 17-year-olds with a confidence that they are Republican or will vote Republican. And Karl, do you want to add anything to that?
Nope, you said it.
Okay. Have I missed anything, Erica? Did you see anything I missed? There's a lot that are very similar, and all the questions I got ahead of time were very similar to what we're seeing here. There's one about the League of Women Voters, register at locations where people become citizens. Should Republicans attempt to do the same, or is that a useless type of endeavor?
I think it's a useful thing to do. We're not talking, I mean, in mass, there are a significant number of new voters at these ceremonies. My sense is a lot of them are going to register to vote anyway. I mean, they're delighted to be American citizens, and they're I mean, remember, we're doing really well among some immigrant populations. If you're a Venezuelan American or a Colombian American, or almost anybody from South America who's come to the United States legally, you're likely to be a Republican because you're fleeing a socialist government. Like, but that's not going to be a reliable source of large numbers of registrations. They tend to be held periodically. They tend to be well covered by the League of Women Voters or other groups. And we're trying to get to the people who aren't going to be in the flow like that.
Excellent. Okay. There's a couple of requests here for Rocky's information. Rocky, how do you feel about me giving out your information?
Absolutely. I'm okay with it.
Okay. Well, if you want to, you can put your stuff in the chat, or I can do it. I got to look it up on my phone now.
Okay.
I know it's hard when you're in the car. Okay. You have any other questions, Erica, that you're seeing? So this is really long now.
Not them all, really.
Okay. Will you provide follow-up notes on the plan they used? I'm not sure what you're looking for.
There's one. I mean, I think one of the questions is, how they can get in touch with like Data Trust to get these lists, and maybe, I don't know.
So they want to know how to contact Data Trust?
Yeah, we'll get you contact. Rocky can get you contact information for Data Trust.
I would say we'll get Rocky's information in here, and then you can contact him for extra notes and any specific questions you have for the program, how to contact Data Trust, all of those type of things. I'll look it up real quick. I have it on. And let's see. Do you have anything that you want to say in closing? Either one of you?
I think we lost Rocky.
Oh no, we lost Rocky. Okay, Karl, do you have anything that you'd like to share?
I want to say that I like Molly Coranda's screenshot, which I think is the famous Edward Hopper Nighthawk painting. Very cool.
Oh, nice.
But anyway, let me just be a little bit serious. This could not have happened without TFRW. And they have made a huge difference in the politics of our state by helping add 500,000 new Republicans to the rolls. And lots of candidates have benefited from that. And what they did, you can do too. And it's just a question of will, whether your state party and Republicans in your state are willing to commit to such an effort, and whether your Republican women's clubs are willing to throw their muscle into the fight. They have done so in Texas, and You know, you go talk to Beth Van Dyne, and there's no doubt in her mind, or Angie Chin Button in the State House, or Matt Shaheen in the State House. There's no doubt in their mind that they're in their offices today because of the work of the volunteers and getting people registered to vote in their district. And there are dozens of other officials, whether it's Cody Gonzalez in the U.S. House, or Judge Carter in the U.S. House, or any number of state representatives and a couple of state senators who say this is making a big difference in strengthening my position back home, so that the Democrats know that they're coming against somebody who's got real advantages over them, and those advantages are increasing.
Absolutely. I know that we had several of our state reps and state reps, like 5 in 2020, that the margin of victory was lower than the number of new registered voters in their district. Yeah. It was very impressive. And they all owe it to this effort. So
he is still there. He just moved off of my screen.
Oh.
So I don't know.
He's disappeared.
Am I back? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. I just want to piggyback off of Karl's message that none of this is possible without the volunteers. Karl Rove doesn't win campaigns, and Donald Trump doesn't win campaigns, and even Rocky doesn't win small campaigns without volunteers. So I want to thank all of you for just being involved and for doing what you do. And I hope that we can work with y'all moving forward to make a difference in some of these swing states ahead of 2024.
I hope so too. I think we need to. Sorry, I'm trying to type and talk to you at the same time. Not very good at that.
He put his contact information in there. Is that what you
did? Get it in?
Yep.
Okay, good. But I'm sitting there, I'm looking it up, and I'm trying to do both. I think, as I said in the very beginning, we are at a point in our country now where we need every single state to start using a strategy with proven results. And this is one that we know works. And people look at Texas and they go, oh, you're red. Yeah, we're really pretty purple, and we're trending the wrong direction. And when you look at the measurables after the last 2 elections, you can see if we had not had this in place, we would have been in big, big trouble. Big trouble. So this is something we need to get on board with. I think every state has an opportunity to try this and see how successful they can be, because we've got to do something to take our country back. So anyway, thank you very much. I'm so appreciative of both of you for coming on today. And ladies, I appreciate you all with all your great questions. And I know there's a lot more. We could talk about this for a long time. Please contact Rocky if you have specific questions. He would be happy to help you. We really do want to see this be successful. And I hope that the RNC picks it up and is willing to help fund some of this and use these strategies throughout the country, because we've got a lot on the line. So if you enjoyed today, then I hope you will join us next month. It's going to be a little bit different. Back to our normal thing. But June 13th, we're going to be meeting, and we're going to be discussing the unholy trinity of drugs, cartels, and open borders. Title 42 is going away on Thursday. For those of you who have been watching your news, you know that is terrifying for the entire country, not just Texas. But it's going to be a very, very good program, and I hope that you will join us. Because this is something that affects every single one of us. So please join us on Tuesday, June 13th, same time, same bat station. And until then, thank you all. As usual, let me know if you have any requests for topics. And until then, adieu.